What you're about to hear is a story about trust, about how a single man turned the most fundamental human instinct, the need to believe in someone, into the most sophisticated financial weapon ever constructed, about how he used it for nearly 50 years inside one of the most regulated industries in the world, while standing in plain sight of everyone whose job it was to stop him. This is not a story about a shadowy criminal, it's a story about a pillar of the financial establishment, a man who helped build the modern stock market, a man who sat on regulatory committees and advised the government on financial policy, a man who, at the very same time, was running the largest fraud in the history of money. In December 2008, a man walked into his son's apartment and told them, for the first time in his life, the truth. He told them that his investment firm, the one managing billions of dollars for some of the most powerful people in the world, was a fraud. That it had always been a fraud. That there were no real investments, no real trades, no real returns. Just a bank account, a pile of fake statements, and decades of lies. His sons called the FBI that same night. The next morning, federal agents arrived at his door. He didn't run. He didn't deny it. He simply said, "There is no innocent explanation." This is the story of Bernie Madoff, the man who ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history for nearly 5 decades, defrauding thousands of investors out of an estimated $65 billion, and the man who, somehow, almost got away with it forever. Most people hear this story and assume it was the work of a shadowy criminal genius operating in the dark. But the real story is far stranger than that. Because Bernie Madoff wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing in the center of Wall Street, in plain sight, for 50 years. And that's precisely why nobody stopped him. Bernie Madoff started with almost nothing. Born in Queens in 1938, he scraped together $5,000 from working beach lifeguard shifts and sprinkler installation during college, and used it to found Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities in 1960 at the age of 22. The legitimate side of his business was genuinely impressive. His firm became one of the pioneers of electronic trading, helping build the technology that would eventually become the NASDAQ stock exchange. By 1990, Madoff was chairman of NASDAQ itself, the man who helped modernize American markets, sitting at the top of the institution he helped create. That legitimate reputation was the foundation of everything that followed. Because alongside the real business, Madoff ran a second, quieter operation, a wealth management arm where wealthy clients handed him money to invest on their behalf. This was the side that was entirely fiction. He promised consistent returns of around 10 to 12% per year. In up markets, in down markets, in every market condition imaginable. He claimed to use a sophisticated options strategy that could always find a way to generate steady gains, no matter what the broader market was doing. The strategy sounded technical enough that most investors didn't ask too many questions, and the returns seemed real, because Madoff mailed them impeccably printed account statements every month, showing exactly the gains he had promised. The statements were completely fabricated. He wasn't running trades at all. He was depositing client money directly into a Chase Manhattan bank account and using new deposits to pay the returns of existing clients. The back office where the fraud was actually run was kept on a separate floor, the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Midtown Manhattan. The legitimate brokerage operated on the 18th and 19th floors. Employees who worked upstairs had no idea what was happening one floor below them. The small team running the fraudulent side used antiquated computers, printed fake trade confirmations, and backdated transactions to match whatever returns Madoff had promised. One employee later told investigators she had been doing the same things in 2008 that she was doing when she first joined the firm, meaning the fraud infrastructure was essentially unchanged for decades. The 17th floor was deliberately kept separate, deliberately kept quiet, and deliberately kept off limits to anyone who didn't need to be there. What's equally striking is the profile of who got hurt. Madoff didn't just target the ultra-wealthy, he specifically cultivated trust within tight-knit communities, particularly Jewish philanthropic networks and country club circles in New York and Palm Beach. The social structure of those communities meant that a recommendation from one trusted member carried the weight of a personal guarantee. People didn't invest with Madoff because they did research. They invested because someone they had known for 30 years told them it was safe. That's not naivety. That's how human trust has always worked. Madoff simply understood it better than almost anyone and weaponized it with extraordinary precision, and that reputation was carefully engineered. Madoff didn't take just anyone's money. He turned people away. Investors sometimes had to beg for access, referred in by existing clients, made to feel they were being granted entry to an exclusive club. The exclusivity made the product seem more legitimate, not less. If Madoff was so successful, why would he need your money? He must be doing you a favor. Among his investors, hedge funds, charities, banks, pension funds, and individual clients who had handed him their entire life savings. The foundation of Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel lost $15 million. Kevin Bacon and Kira Sedgwick lost their savings. Steven Spielberg's charitable foundation was defrauded. Entire philanthropic organizations built over decades were wiped out in a single week. And yet the warnings were there, for years, loudly, repeatedly in writing. In 2000, a financial analyst named Harry Markopoulos sat down with Madoff's returns and spent 4 hours running the numbers. He concluded that they were mathematically impossible. Markets are simply too volatile for any strategy to produce the steady, almost perfectly linear gains that Madoff was reporting. Markopoulos said it was like a baseball player batting .966 for an entire season. Technically within the rules of the game, but not something that exists in the real world. He went to the SEC. He submitted an 8-page complaint. He came back in 2001, then again in 2005 with a 65-page document outlining 30 separate red flags titled, explicitly, "The world's largest hedge fund is a fraud." The SEC investigated Madoff 5 times between 1992 and 2008. 5 times, they found nothing. Later investigations would reveal that agents had been intimidated by Madoff's reputation, confused by the complexity of his explanations, and, in at least one documented case, distracted from pursuing the most important leads. One investigator who came the closest to uncovering the truth was quietly reassigned to unrelated work. There is one more detail worth sitting with. J.P. Morgan Chase, Madoff's primary bank for over 2 decades, was later found to have flagged internal concerns about his accounts as far back as 1998. In 2014, the bank paid nearly $2 billion to settle charges that it had failed to alert regulators to those concerns. The money moved through their systems for decades. The red flags existed inside the institution he banked with. And still, nothing happened until it was too late. What finally brought it down was not the SEC, not a whistleblower, not a smart investigator. It was the 2008 financial crisis. As markets collapsed worldwide, Madoff's investors, many of whom were hemorrhaging losses elsewhere, rushed to withdraw their money. Between September and December 2008, clients requested approximately $7 billion in redemptions. When Madoff checked his bank account, he found $300 million. On December 3rd, he pulled aside his most trusted deputy and said 3 words, "I'm out of money." A week later, he held the firm's annual Christmas party. He handed out early bonuses. He went home, sat down with his sons, who worked at the firm and had grown increasingly suspicious about where the bonus money was coming from, and told them everything. Here is the part of this story that should make you deeply uneasy. Madoff's fraud was not built on complexity. It was built on trust. His investors didn't do due diligence because the social proof around him was so overwhelming that due diligence felt almost insulting. You checked the credentials of strangers. You didn't question a former NASDAQ chairman. You didn't ask to audit the books of a man who had been regulating those same markets for decades. And the SEC failed not because Madoff was too clever to catch, but because the people tasked with catching him were operating in the same system of deference and reputation that kept everyone else from asking the right questions. Bernie Madoff died in federal prison in April 2021 at the age of 82, 12 years into a 150-year sentence. His son Mark took his own life 2 years after his father's arrest. His son Andrew died of cancer in 2014. The money, the real money, the actual dollars that were deposited, is estimated at around $18 billion in principal. Over $1 billion has been recovered and returned to victims. For most of them, Not nearly enough. Here's the question this story leaves behind. How many other systems are you trusting right now? Not because you've verified them, but because everyone around you seems to trust them too. Madoff's real lesson isn't about fraud. It's about what happens when reputation becomes a substitute for evidence, and how long that substitution can hold before reality catches up. Has there ever been a moment where you trusted something completely without checking, just because everyone else seemed to? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the financial collapses, frauds, and human failures that keep repeating themselves. Across centuries, across markets, across everything we think we understand about money.